Welcome to Helping Leaders Achieve What Matters. Today, as our guest, we have Michael Deutsch. He is an EOS certified EOS implementer. Now, if you're not familiar with EOS stands for Entrepreneurial Operating System. It was probably made famous by the author of the book, Gino Wickman, who wrote this book, Traction, or you may have heard, what the heck is EOS? But I think it's the best system for running a business. I mean, the companies that are running EOS have had incredible results. About a third of my Vistage members are running EOS, and I've seen some of them absolutely transform from a dysfunctional business to one that's hitting profits beyond their imagination as well. So Michael not only is this background as a certified EOS implementer, he's a former business owner, so he really understands the needs of businesses, as well as a member of several leadership teams. So he understands all of these roles. And I asked Michael today to help us on the topic of measurables. I get a lot of questions from my CEO members, from my key executives on navigating key performance indicators, metrics management, and mastering business insights. So welcome to the podcast, Mike.
Thank you, Mark. It's great to be here with you.
How would you like to start? Do you want to say anything about metrics in general, or would you like to just to hear some of the questions that some of my CEOs and key executives have sent me?
It's a good question. I think that maybe the best way to start is to really understand why. Because I think that we often lose the context. We're such a data-driven society now as a whole that I think we've lost a little bit of the context of why we want measurables. Because often I feel that, and what I see, and myself included in previous lives, is we have these dashboards, and these dashboards contain what I like to call glory numbers. So it's, sales and revenue and profits and number of clients and, how much activity has happened in the business, but it really doesn't drive any action on our part, right? They're nice numbers. And sometimes we feel great. We look at it, our profit is up. We feel great. Number of clients is in a great spot and we feel good. And when it's down, we feel bad and we're not sure. And we go into a little bit of a tailspin. How do we actually look at the data to really drive action throughout a business? And I often look at it, and I make this comparison sometimes, which is, as business owners and business leaders, we've built this high-performing organization, right? And I liken it to building high-performing cars. I don't know much about cars. I know people that build cars. And what they do is they build these, they put a tremendous amount of time and money and effort into building this high-performance vehicle, and they measure everything. I hear terms coming out that I have no idea what it means, but I know they're measuring every single aspect of that car to make sure the system as a whole is working to performance, the high level of performance that they expect when they build this. Why don't we do the same thing in our businesses? What we're doing is building these high performance cars, and all we're looking at is the speedometer, and we're looking at the gas tank, and that's it. We're not measuring anything else in the business. And so when we're able to take a step back and say, we built this system, right? A high performance system. Why are we not measuring everything and seeing where the tweaks need to be made and make sure that the entire system is performing individually in the individual levels at the expectation that we have when we built it? So once we start to look at it in that context, we start to really think about, well, that makes sense. How do we start getting the right data? Where do we start to look at the right things within the business so that there are things that we could take actions on and not just good information coming out? Again, nice to know how fast I'm going. But if I'm not getting good efficiencies in the system, what does that really tell us?
I would challenge one thing that you said, is that I don't know that it's just for high performance organizations.
Fair.
I think for any organization, any company that wants to become a high performance organization. As you know, I'm a former business owner, and I was the micromanager on steroids for the first 5 years that I was in business, because I had to try and have my finger in everything, because I had a lot of fear that my business was going to fail, like my first business did. So I was, checking every line of code. I was checking every invoice. I was going on every sales call. I was checking every sales proposal. And what metrics did for me when I learned after I joined Vistage what they were, was it helped me to relax and to see not that I could predict the future with 100% accuracy, but I could predict the future a little bit. And if I saw something like my number of sales proposals going down, I could anticipate that I needed to take an action, like find out what was going on with the sales rep, so that, because I knew that was directly related to future revenue. And it helped me to the relationships between every line item on my financial statement, instead of just looking at, did I make a profit last month?
Yeah, it's really interesting. You hit on some really great points in there. Point number one is that what measurables throughout an organization, when everyone has a measurable, what it's helping to do is to build communication and trust, because you're able to look and see, excuse me, you're able to look and see if those things are staying on track individually and as an organization as a whole. What that does for you is it allows you to let go a little bit, because the information's handy and you can trust that it's getting done because you see the numbers as it's happening. So you can actually trust that it gets done, which allows you to then let go. That's part of the key to any good team, is that trust. And you're right, from a I mentioned high performance, and you're right, we build high performance cars, but frankly, every car needs to have everything measured, right? So it's not just the high performance. I liken it to high performance cars that we're building, because that's what C-suite often does, right? We're building these, but there are times when it's not performing and we have to figure out why. And the measurables are the pinpoint accuracy within the system to help us understand. And one of the points that you brought up to help us get ahead of that is the leading indicator. And what you want out of your measurables and your scorecard in general are leading indicators. I want to see the problem coming weeks, months in advance before it becomes this big, enormous issue in the business. And now I'm months behind and I have to dig myself out of it. The cost of digging yourself out of a problem is much greater than if I just dealt with the problem as it was starting to bubble up. So what we want to do with our scorecard measurables is find these leading indicators that indicate that something is going off track at some point in the near future, and I need to get ahead of it now. We're looking for patterns and trends, basically.
Yes. You mentioned something I think is interesting. Everyone has a measurable. Now, really, is that possible? I mean, I see that probably one of the biggest frustrations that I hear from my CEOs is that why people aren't accountable. But it seems like if every person had a measurable, there would have to be some accountability. But I never thought of a measurable for the bookkeeper or the receptionist or the customer service rep. For me, it was always sales had measurables. Maybe a bookkeeper did as far as accounts receivable if she or he were responsible for collections. But everybody has a measurable.
Everybody has a measurable, and every measurable which is appropriate to the individual, right? So the measurables you're going to have at your leadership level are going to be very different than you might have throughout the organization where your bookkeeper has something. It has to be appropriate to the individual. But think about the impact that a bookkeeper has with AR, right? If your AR goes awry, you might not meet payroll, right? Or you might have to contact your bank and talk about, new lines, or there's so many, and these are all leading indicators, right? So we have to make sure that each person within the organization we're making sure that they're getting their job done within the process that they work in. And that's one of the areas that you can start measuring you definitely should measure within your business, is the process. So there's a lot of different ways, even from the bookkeeping perspective, is how do we dig in to make sure our bookkeeping process is efficient, to make sure that we're getting paid on time, because that cash flow impact is huge. It's enormous for us. Everyone in the organization has the ability to impact the performance and productivity of the organization in their own unique way. And we need to make sure that we're driving accountability in those areas. And scorecard measurables, or measurables in general, are one of those ways.
Yeah. I mean, one of the questions that one of the CEOs submitted to me is, could I have too many measurables? How do I manage all of these KPIs? I mean, if you have 100 employees, you got 100 different measurables, and I'm the CEO, I'm going to be looking at all these. And I know if I have too many measurables, I'm not really paying attention.
Yeah, it becomes wallpaper. That's what I call it. It's wallpaper. It just becomes
like the Matrix, all those numbers just coming in.
Exactly. It's like the Matrix, right? It becomes that wallpaper, and the numbers start to lose context. So what we say in EOS is 5 to 15 numbers on a scorecard. And you'll have scorecards throughout the organization. But really what you're looking for is less is more here. You have to grab the key indicators, the key numbers that really drive performance, that are going to drive activity and action, help us get ahead of the problem. Those are the ones that we're looking at. And as you go through the organization, you're going to get a little bit more granular as you go down throughout the organization. And at the higher level, we're seeing it more aggregated, higher level numbers at the top, but we have to be thinking about less is more. Less is more here because, again, it becomes just, we lose the context. It becomes that wallpaper, and that doesn't help us to drive activity. It just blends into the background.
So if I understand what you're saying, it's like you would have an accounting manager maybe that keeps track and has the measurables for everyone in the accounting department, but something's going to roll up to one measurable maybe that she reports to the leadership team.
Correct. The measurables that are important at the leadership level from the accounting function that gives the leadership team an idea of what's going on within the business, right? And so each area of your business will have that happening because, frankly, does your leadership team need to know all of the granular activity that's happening throughout the organization? They don't need that level of detail, nor should they want it, because that's getting them into the weeds, and that's that micromanagement that we were talking about before. So we're trusting our leaders to be able to drive their functions of their organization and give us the relevant information in the scorecard that we need to be able to predict issues within our level of the business.
Yeah, one of the I guess epiphanies I had as a Vistage member when I was right on was a Vistage speaker that said, if you were away on a faraway island, and they could only fax something, this was telling you how old I am, if they could only fax something to you once a week with 5 to 10 measurables on there, what are the 5 to 10 things that you would want to know that so that you could relax on your desert island?
Yeah, right. That's exactly it. What are these 5 to 10 numbers that are going to tell you whether you're, putting down the pina colada and getting up and leaving and flying home to take care of the issue, or you're staying for another week, right? What are those 5 to 10 numbers or 5 to 15 numbers that you really need to understand how the business is operating? That's exactly what I'm looking for.
So who comes up with these measurables? I mean, do I, as the CEO, have to think of measurables for everyone? Is it the department head, or is it the employees and the staff themselves that come up with measurables?
Yes, everybody. It's a collaborative approach, right? And frankly, coming up with measurables is not easy. I tell my teams in EOS, we say it takes 1 to 3 months to come up with it. Frankly, some teams struggle. A lot of times what I hear is they don't have access to the data. And so they don't even know what the data looks like right now. So it takes some time to get there, but it's a collaborative approach. What's most important for the team to hear and to see? Yes, you could say the CEO has an idea of a whole bunch of things that the CEO wants to hear and see. But what does the rest of the team need? And we need to hear from them as well, because a leading indicator, what's a trailing indicator to one person is a leading indicator to someone else, right? Marketing leads and the amount of business that comes in from a marketing effort, or the amount of leads that comes in off a marketing effort, is a trailing indicator perhaps on the marketing side, but it's a leading indicator into sales. And the CEO may not be thinking at that level, but this marketing person and the salesperson are, your sales leaders are. So we need that level of collaboration in the team to understand how this is impacting that, how, the amount of leads impacts the amount of calls that the sales team is going to have to make. And then as sales teams close business, trailing indicator, that becomes a leading indicator into your operations. Operations needs to know that this is coming, and I have to make sure that I'm properly staffed, or that, manufacturing is ready, shipping is ready. Everything is in place to handle the workflow that's coming in. And so you need that collaboration at the team level. And as you drill this down throughout the organization, same concept, right? Because what's important to one person may not be important to someone else. So we want those voices to say it and hear it so we can actually get it there.
Yeah, a couple of my questions that I received from CEOs were related to sales. So one question was, what are the most effective forward-looking sales scorecard metrics other than the pipeline created?
Yeah, so I look at pipeline in general as one of those glory numbers. In and of itself, as a whole, it doesn't tell you very much. So when I'm talking to my clients about this, what I often say is break down the sales process. Break down the sales process. Let's understand success as you want it and as it's currently performing in the organization. and see if we're doing that. And let's start measuring the process itself, right? I can pull up a quick example for you here. If I could share my screen, here's an example scorecard, and simply put, if we look at it, and this is just everyone always relates to sales. It just makes sense. And at a very, very high level, because we can drill down deeper, and this is unique to every organization, your process of driving sales into the business is unique. But at its basic high level, it's usually something like sales calls lead to meetings, lead to proposals, which lead to closed business. And if you look at this scorecard, not only do you have what you're measuring, you have your target over here, your goal, you also know who's accountable for it. And there's your accountability piece. In this case, it's Robert. Robert's going to be our sales leader, perhaps, right? And so what we're looking at here is not just a pipeline, but we're looking at their process, because 50 calls will lead to 10 sales meetings, which lead to 5 proposals and 2 closed deals. And in turn, that's going to lead to roughly $85,000 a week in this example of revenue coming into the business. If you look at this pattern and this trend over here, you can see that they start to go offline. We're going for a 13-week history at a glance, by the way, I should tell you. And what we're looking at is, from right to left over here, you can see that they're sailing along and then they hit a little speed bump. Well, this is indicating to me that if I don't get ahead of this, my revenue is going to dip. I know it because I know what my process looks like. And so what you want to do is you really want to track the process in here. And what you could start doing is, we're looking at goals in terms of numbers, but we can look at efficiency. So we can look at everything from percentages. So what is my conversion ratio from calls to meetings? I can look at time if I want, right? Should it take 2 weeks to go from calls to meeting? 2 months? 6 months? What's the right amount of time to go from one to another? And once I have an understanding of that, then I can look for improvements. So not only can I look to get ahead of the issue, because if you imagine if this all goes red, the whole thing goes red. And I need to get ahead of that because otherwise I'm digging out of a 2-3 month problem. But I could also look to drive efficiencies. Here it's 50 sales calls lead to 2 closed deals, right? What if I was able to take 50 sales calls and make 10 closed deals?
It's interesting because I was a sales manager for a Fortune 500 company. And I measured this, and I'm going to tell you one other thing that I measured, but I measured it for every salesperson. So I can see variances so that if I had one salesperson that was making 50 sales calls and getting 2, and then I had another sales call person that was making 50 and getting 0, and another one that was making 50 and getting 4, I would be trying to figure out what is the difference between what are these salespeople doing? Are they not following the process? And
that's right.
The percentage of sales calls to meetings was significantly different. Then I would go on some sales calls with them or listen to them making some sales calls to figure out what was the quality of the interactions that they were doing? And if the number of proposals wasn't equaling the same percentage of closed business, I was taking a look at each of their proposals to see if they were following our standardized format or if maybe they didn't qualify. Those were the couple of metrics I had were qualified. And for me, taking a look at the pipeline, they had to have met with the decision maker who has declared that they have a budget to do something within the next 90 days, and that they had a need that we could solve. So that would mean number of qualified meetings that resulted in proposals. And then we also measured the dollar value of the proposals, and it got to the point after, maybe 6 to 12 months that I could predict with like 90% accuracy what my sales were going to be in a given month.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it, right? And that's really when you start to, again, big system, when we're looking at a system in place, what you're describing is the overall system, right? You're not just talking about the process itself, which is, you make some calls and they get you some meetings and that's going to get you proposals. You're talking about the hows. These are the whats and perhaps the whens behind it. How often do we do it? When does that have to happen? But you're also talking about the how. Right. And take a step back for 1 second. This is your aggregated scorecard, perhaps, at a higher level at the, perhaps at the leadership level. Right. We're looking at an aggregated set of numbers. But you'll drill this down to start understanding where your efficiencies are. One person is more efficient than another. Is there an opportunity to take what that person is doing and teach others how they're doing it, why they're successful, how they're successful? There's a difference between in process. There's a difference between how I do my job and what I'm doing and when. And I think that very often the how is it's the secret sauce, right? How do I make 50 calls equal 10 closed deals? and drilling down the way that you did into your specific unique pipeline and how that flows, and looking for the efficiencies there is how we can actually use the scorecard and measurables to drive that efficiency through the organization. Again, big system look, processes through the organization and how they tie into each other. And we're focused on sales, but you can imagine we can do this anywhere throughout the business.
Yes, yes. One of the questions that I received was, how often should we be looking at these KPIs? I noticed you had a 13-week average for measuring them weekly. Is that the frequency?
Yeah, so in EOS, we say you're looking at your scorecard measurables on a weekly basis. One of the reasons that you want to do this is because you want to get ahead of those issues before they become big problems. If you look at your numbers too infrequently, let's say a month apart, you've got a 30-day window in there where something can go sideways, you don't even know about it, right? And by the time you might catch it, 29 days later, and you've had almost an entire month of some big problem that's just festering. We want to get ahead of this information, get ahead of these issues before they become big problems. And that's why we want to look at it a little bit more frequently. And so we use the scorecard and that 13-week history to be able to get ahead of these problems on a more frequent basis. And I think that one of the things that we lose sight of here is, when the numbers, let's call it, become stale, or when, the scorecard just becomes an exercise in looking at the information. If you don't treat the measurables in the scorecard with the respect that it deserves, you're not tweaking the system. You're not fixing the system. And your system is going to continue to perform at the level that it's been performing. And that's one of the issues that tends to happen with looking at it too frequently, or not too frequently, but on this weekly basis. So some of the things that we've heard is that, well, I'm looking at it too frequently, I feel like it's not doing anything. Are you giving it the respect that it deserves? And that's one way of coming towards it and saying, this is an indicator of my whole system.
Yeah. I know that as part of the EOS system, you have a weekly meeting with the leadership team, for example, that you call a meeting. And as part of that meeting, the scorecard is there, and anything that is out of tolerance with the goal becomes something to become IDS. Identify, what is it? Discuss and solve, IDS. Yeah. It becomes an issue because you're looking at what is the problem that's causing this, and you're going to identify, because it's showing up there. You're going to discuss it amongst the whole team as to what could be causing this and what could be done with it, and you're coming up with a solution that is going to resolve the problem before it becomes a bigger problem. And this is also the way that everybody is held accountable. Yeah, and that's the part that I think that when that type of conversation comes up about the scorecard measurables aren't driving the results, well, I could ask one, do you have the right measurables? And we have to unpack that. But if you do feel like you have the right measurables, are you treating them with the respect that they deserve? Are you really digging into it? Are you really going into it and saying, why is this off track, and let's get it back on track? If you're not, then I want to question whether you've got the right measurable. If it's not that important to you, are we looking at the right thing? Right. And then once we have that, and again, this can be drilled down through the organization. So we might see an indicator that there's a specific, perhaps, person who's not driving accountability. We have to deal with that. That's a separate issue. But looking at the scorecard itself, we have to then unpack that. And that's what IDS does for us, right? It helps us to understand what's the root cause of that problem. How do we fix that? What are potential solutions as we discuss it? And then let's come away with a clear plan of action to solve that problem, because that number being off track is not acceptable to us, right? And we have to make sure that we get it back on track, because it's a key part of the system that we've built, right? The car can't perform at its peak efficiency if little things here and there are not at their efficiencies. So we have to make sure that we're getting that efficiency throughout. And that's what I hear is the respect part, because I recently heard somebody report, well, I look at all the scorecards, but we don't talk about them in our level 10 meetings. I'm like, what do you mean you don't talk to them? Well, I look if anyone's off track, and then I go have a private conversation with them. But then they aren't held accountable. That's right. That's exactly what the issue was that she was dealing with, is that people weren't feeling accountable because they were able to make an excuse or something in a one-off meeting versus in front of the whole leadership team to talk about your number that's off track. Yeah.
And what you're also doing is you're eliminating the team component of this, right? So I often talk about there's different levels of accountability within a team. There's the self accountability. I'm accountable to myself. I made a commitment, and I'm a person of integrity. I've made a commitment to get this done, to keep this number on track, and I'm not getting it done. The number's off track. I need to pull it back on track. That's me, self accountability. The next level would be team accountability, where we hold each other accountable. And if we let somebody slide, is that what we want on our team? We want lower standards. Do we accept the lower standards? We as a team have to hold that person accountable. How can I help you? Hey, Mark, this number is off track. What's going on here? And how do I help you? What do you need to get that back on track? Because it's important to us. Let's get it back on track. The last one, of course, would be your integrator at the leadership level, which is the person who, drives the leadership team. That person's got to drive accountability to the individuals as well. Perhaps that means a one-on-one conversation at some point, but we need to make sure that the team is involved in driving that as well. Not only that, but you also potentially lose the collaboration. That number is off track. I don't know why, and I don't know how to fix it. And someone in the room may have an answer, an idea that you didn't think of. So if you're having that one-on-one conversation, you're losing a little bit of that collaboration, but it should be discussed at the team level.
Yeah. All of us is smarter than one of us.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. That's the power of Vistage meetings.
It's true.
Other people can see things that you don't see.
That's right. We don't know everything, nor should we think we do. Right. So I don't know what I don't know. Tell me what I don't know. I'm happy, me personally, I'm always happy to hear a suggestion, an idea, because I want to grow. I want to learn. I don't know everything. Right. And we should be thinking that way as leaders as well. We don't know everything. And so if you have some idea, I don't even have to love the idea 100%, but is there something within that idea that I can build upon?
Yeah.
Right. Go into a positive mindset over there and build upon that. So there's a lot of opportunity that's lost with not discussing this at the team level.
I agree. Now, I had a couple questions come in that I'd love your feedback on.
Sure.
One of them is a biotech company that's asking, what's the best way to handle binary metrics? Is this discouraged? One of our metrics is, can we currently use our system to produce this result? To me, that sounds more like a goal versus a metric. But what's your feedback?
I'm going to take a step back because you said something about goals versus metrics. And then I want to answer the binary one. First things first, the way that I look at the goals on a scorecard is sometimes I reframe it a little bit as it's not necessarily a goal. It's more of a threshold. Right? Goals will come in, in EOS, we call them rocks, 90-day rocks, 90-day priorities, goals that we're focused on. You have a 1-year goal, a 3-year goal, a 10-year goal. We have all of these goals about who we want to be at some future point with the vision of our organization. What the scorecard is, though, it's measuring real-time numbers. So what I want here is not my goal, not my dream number. I want to know when something is going sideways. I want a red flashing light saying, hey, there's a potential problem here. To me, that's a threshold. I have a threshold here. So we're measuring a threshold first, and that threshold is to a leading indicator to a future problem. If my revenue drops, I hate to use revenue because it can be a trailing number and a lot, but if my revenue drops below a certain point consistently 2-3 weeks, I may have a potential payroll issue in 2 months because it's going to be a cash flow problem, right? It's a very simple example, of course. Now, tying it back to the binary question, I personally don't mind yes and no's. I don't mind binary because they're very measurable. They're very easy to tell if it's on track or off track. But the only thing is that it has to tell you something of value. It can't be one of those glory numbers, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking. It has to be really something that's going to drive action. If that number goes off track, is it a leading indicator to something else? If that number is a no, that because it's a binary, if that's not a number, but if the answer to the question is a no, is it telling you something that you can take an action on? If it's not, then perhaps it's just a glory number, or it's not the right measurable because it's really not giving us a pulse on what's happening. And so
what I see is that, is it part of the process? Because
Correct.
I'm assuming this is a no every single week. Does that mean I bring it up at my level 10 meeting every single week and discuss, okay, why haven't we invented this yet? I mean, they're trying to invent something new. There's got to be something prior to that in a process that leads to that you can measure.
Exactly. And that's exactly it. So in that case, I would say that's not a leading indicator into something. It's just a status update, right? And so, yeah, in that case, I would say it's probably not a great measurable. But like you said, what does lead to that, right? And you can take a step back. That's often what I do is I take a step back and go, what's your measure of success here? And let's build back off of that. Here, I have another slide that I often use with my clients to show you, what I do with my clients is I show them this and I say, what's the measure of success in your what's the measure of success in your specific area? Let's start there and work our way back. Right. And so if it's a yes or a no here, what's leading me into that yes or no?
Right.
And back here, track back here. And often if you don't know, you feel uncomfortable because some people have a hard time saying, well, what's my measure of success? And I often say, so if you were to be measured on one thing, your raise, your bonus, your job is measured on one thing, what would that be? And they'll give me something. Sometimes they struggle with it. I say, I flip it, because the opposite side of that coin is, what's your biggest pain point? What's your biggest pain point? And they're often the same thing. For Robert, in my scorecard example, Robert's was closed business, right? Salespeople are measured on closed business. What's Robert's biggest pain point? I'm not closing enough business, right? So it's usually the same exact thing. Step it back into, tell me how we're getting to this yes or no, because the no itself doesn't do anything, but back here it does. And that's your process.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, another question I got was from an engineering manager, like, how do I come up with a metric for my engineers? So thinking about it that way, what's his biggest pain point? I mean, his personal biggest pain point was, we're on EOS and everyone has to have a number. But I think that he has to look beyond that, right? That how do I really know if an engineer is doing a good job or not? Like, my biggest pain point comes to a performance review. Do I give this person a bonus or not a bonus? Did they do a good job or did they not do a good job? How do I know which my engineers are better than my other engineers? And you really have to take a look at what distinguishes them. How do you step back, like you were saying, to step two?
Yeah, and again, tying it into the whole system, the system as a whole. And what's your systems? Your systems are your processes. So when you tie it into your processes, then we can start looking at measurables throughout that, right? So specifically for engineering, I'm not sure, but what is the measure of success for an engineer? Or frankly, what are the biggest pain points that you're having? And then we hold individuals accountable to that pain point, right?
So I had an engineering company. Mine was on time and on budget. And I proposed that to him. And he says, but they're not in control because the client could create delays. So then that causes it to go off time, which then can cause it to go off budget. How can I hold somebody accountable for something they're not in complete control of?
Well, the beauty of that, and there's a few things in there, right? So first of all, we're going back into predict. And this is what scorecards do for you, is they predict. So if we look at that process, is there a way of predicting whether this job is going to go on track or off track, on time, off time, or out of not on time or off budget? And if there is a way of predicting that, let's start tracking that. Not only that, but I like to say all the time, well, as we go through this and we're starting to track this information, well, is there anything that we can do to improve upon that? Yeah, I know it's outside of our control, but my belief is that there's always a lever to pull. I don't always see the lever so clearly. I need to start asking the tough questions. Frankly, sometimes I pull one lever and it doesn't work, so I pull another one. If you're going, let's say, it's not on time because it's always a client issue. Well, is there a better method of communication? Is there something in my process that I could tweak that somehow gets me and the client back on the same page, which reduces essentially errors in this process, right? That drives that efficiency, the productivity, which ultimately drives profitability, because it sounds like, my opinion, there's a lot of waste in that scenario. So how do I eliminate that waste? By measuring it and then asking the tough questions. If 90% of my jobs are not on time, I need to be asking tough questions. Why? And what can we do? What's within our control to be able to improve that? Do I need more frequent conversations with the client? Do I need to provide them some other method of communication or something? Do I need to do better upfront work? and ask questions up front to get ahead of these, right? And we can start digging in to see where are we, what's the common theme here? Why are we not on time frequently? And try to get ahead of that. There's always something that we can do. And I try to encourage people to say, just because you feel like it's not out of control, that it's out of your control, doesn't mean that it necessarily is. You always have impact. You always have the ability to pull a lever.
No, that's true. I think back to my engineering days, and the ones that we were off track led us to discover that we were off track because the client wasn't ready for us on installation day. Either their computer hadn't arrived or their IT person wasn't there. So then the process, more communication, that before we would set an appointment, confirm that you've received your computer, that it's unpacked, that it works, confirm that you're going to have IT support that day, confirm that you have an access to the internet, and that substantially reduced it. I mean, I won't say it was 100%, but what I'm hearing you say is that it's even if you're not, it's something to track, to cause you to think into the process and look back about what I can do about it.
That's right. And we're looking for that root cause. What is driving that? What's underneath it that's driving that? Look for that root cause. And then you can tie it back to what we talked about a few minutes ago, which is that IDS, identify, discuss, and solve. For those that are unfamiliar with it, it's EOS's methodology for how do we solve issues. So it's not just we talk about random stuff and we meander. We are very focused on, we have an issue, we want to solve this issue, we want to discuss it and come away with an action plan to make sure that issue gets solved. And ideally, we want to solve it at the root cause, because we're constantly putting out fires that are symptoms of the root cause. Let's get to the root cause. If the root cause is something that we can uncover, that we can impact, well, then let's do that and see that efficiencies. And frankly, try it. And if it doesn't work, try something different, right? We need progress, not perfection. So let's try something, right? That's the concept of iteration. Try one iteration, and if that doesn't work, try another.
That makes a lot of sense. Now, one of my CEOs is in a change management process and says, what can we measure in a change management process?
So change management is an interesting one. So, a lot of that depends on what kind of change you're going through in the organization. And that's where it's kind of similar to going back to process. You're going through change management for a reason. You're going through a change in the organization for a reason. Why? Let's understand that reason and start measuring, because there's usually some kind of performance indicator there that we need to change. Is it speed? Is it a percentage? Is it more efficiency somewhere else? What are we actually doing here? We have to measure that, the speed and the change of the impact in the organization. So we have to start uncovering, and often change management, frankly, ties to processes and systems within the organization. Back into what we were talking about before. Let's look at the process that we defined, the old versus the new perhaps, and see, is the new version of this process performing? Is it, as we measure it, is it performing to the way that we designed it? Because we designed it to achieve some kind of a result. So are we getting the results that we're seeing from the system? And so I think you have to, from a change management perspective, you really have to take a look at, why are you going through the change management? What are we changing? And let's measure what we're changing to see if we're actually getting the results that we want.
So in his case, I think they're implementing a new ERP system, enterprise resource planning. Yeah. Just changing all the software of every way that everyone is doing everything. So it's overwhelming.
Yeah. What's the measure of success? And I have clients that talk about that, and I say, great, you're implementing a new ERP system. That's phenomenal. Why? Right? Because that's going to uncover, well, we did it because we had an inefficiency over here. Well, why was that inefficient? How is that inefficient? And you're implementing it. What's the expected result? And the expected result is that, well, we're going to, improve the, shipping time, lead time for shipping, because we're streamlining it. Well, great. Then let's measure lead time for shipping. Right. And it depends on what you're looking to do. But in that case, let's figure out why we implemented, well, I'm sure they know, why did we implement the ERP and what are the desired results? And let's start measuring those desired results and do a comparison. Frankly, if we have some of the previous data, do a comparison from pre-ERP system or whatever system they were using before to what we have in place, because we want to see if this is efficient or not, whether it's working for us.
Makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
What else do you think CEOs of small businesses should know about metrics and KPIs that we haven't talked about today?
I go back to understanding that you're building a high performance machine that, well, we may not be performing at the level that we want it right now, but we need to be looking at the systems to figure out how to get there. Where are those efficiencies within the system as a whole, and respect the data. And frankly, if you're not respecting the data, we need to ask why. And sometimes we have to look at people to understand if the people are not being accountable to the data. Or is it wallpaper? We have too much, or are we not looking at the right numbers, or what exactly is going on over there that we need to drive? And frankly, if it feels like it's stale, start looking for areas of improvement, right? Meaning that everything's always on track. Well, that's great. Maybe A, we should change our thresholds, and B, maybe we need to start looking for areas of improvement. Maybe it's time to grow and see what we can do to improve things.
This has been excellent. If somebody wanted to learn more about EOS or to get in touch with you to ask some specific questions, what's the best way to find you?
Usually email. It's michael.deutsch@eosworldwide.com. People can call me also. We can provide the information for them to call me or text me, WhatsApp me. I'm happy to answer questions, help however I can. Even if people want to just grab some time on my calendar just to go over scorecards and bounce ideas off of me and see if I can help. Always happy to help.
Great. Well, thank you so much today for your time. This has been great. This has been helping leaders achieve what matters.
Thank you, Mark.